right, so Sasha, how do you feel about Anvil, the story of Anvil getting re-released? Because it first came out in 2008. When I watched it when I was 18 when it first came out, I remember it being much more funnier than it was when I watched it this time. I'm like, oh my God, this is so horrible what these guys go through day in and day
It's because you're older.
right.
So I think it's an interesting movie. It's like the films that I love, if you see them at different ages, like Withnail and I watched it when I was 19, 20, 21, but then seeing that movie when you're 50 is a completely different experience. So I think that's probably a good sign that you can have different experiences with the same film. It's not just a repeat. It's more about where you're at in your life at any given moment that you watch a movie. So it is still very funny. It's just as you get older, I think you realize, time is running, time is running out or running
Right.
short, or at least continuing to run out, and therefore there's only a little bit of time, a certain amount. There's limited time to achieve what you're trying to do and to survive, and so I think that's what we found. It's really interesting that because the kids, there's a new audience for the movie. All these kids came to New York and LA, and they're in from 18 to 25, and they're just completely loving the movie. And they for them it's hopeful and inspiring, and for
Right.
perhaps older people it's more challenging, but that's good.
It was a
It
completely
is
different experience. Yeah.
completely different experience. And watching it the other night in LA with 1,200 people, we had a big event in LA last Thursday, and it was twice the size of the original premiere. And all these kids came, and it was just so extraordinary to watch them discover the film and watch it with a big audience. And that's really the way it's meant to be watched, is in a theater. So luckily tomorrow it's coming out into about 220 theaters across the US. So I mean, I'm hoping that, whoever decides to show up goes and has a theater experience of this film, because that's really what it's about for me anyway.
Right. So how did you first get introduced to Anvil before you signed on to direct this documentary?
Well, I knew them when I was a kid, and I saw them in Sounds magazine, and Lips was on the front cover, holding a chainsaw with a dildo between his teeth.
Right.
And it said, Anvil is coming, and I got the record Metal on Metal, and I became obsessed with it. Went to see them at the Marquee, and it was extraordinary. I just loved the band. They were so heavy. They were also funny, but they were just really tight band. And I met them backstage and offered to take them around London. They'd never been to England, and we went on tour. And I went on tour with them as a drum roadie the following summer on my school holidays. And so we became friends. They were like the older brothers that I'd never had. And then we hung out together. And then, 20 years after the fact, I got back in touch and discovered that they'd never given up. And I was like, well, they never made it. What
Right.
happened? So then I thought, okay, I'm going to make this movie about never giving up on a dream. And that's what happened. I didn't really know what I was doing, but here we are, 13 years after the original release.
And you got so many interesting characters to really give like tidbit interviews in this. Like you have Lemmy speaking on Anvil, you have Lars from Metallica speaking on Anvil. So how did you get all these guys interested in talking about Anvil throughout the movie as well?
Well, I mean, they were fans. I mean, Lars was an original fan. I mean, Anthrax began as an Anvil cover band. So Scott Ian, so Tom Araya. I mean, they all wanted to do it because they also felt Anvil had been, Motorhead and Lemmy had taken Anvil out on tour a couple of times. In fact, Lemmy asked Lips to join Motorhead
Oh,
after
wow.
Fast
Yeah.
and Clark left, and he didn't want to break up his kind of childhood band in Anvil. So yeah, they all wanted to do it. They just felt this was one of the bands who'd kind of been lost and probably deserved more recognition and support, and so they were happy to agree.
And Anvil kind of kickstarted that 80s metal sound that you hear in bands like Testament and those people as well. So did you notice like when you were listening to any other bands, like, you know what, this sounds like a influenced Anvil sound as well?
Well, it felt like there was a thing going on in several places. There was something
Yeah.
going on in San Francisco. There was the new wave of British heavy metal. There was the thrash metal that was beginning. On the East Coast, there was so many different things happening, but all at the same time. But it was, heavier double bass drum sound, darker, more intense, rhythmical, loud riffs. A lot of it was from Motorhead, which was kind of punk metal in a way. But there was something growing, and Anvil was part of that. even though they were Canadian, they were sort of considered part of the new wave of British heavy metal because they'd come to England and kind of blown up there first, actually, way before Canada and anyone else. And still, England is one of the great markets for them. So it was just a beautiful thing to feel like you're all sort of on the cusp of something happening. And obviously Metallica went in and became Metallica, and Anthrax and Slayer and Megadeth. So, but this was before all of those
Right.
bands. So I think those bands, when they came along, they were also seeing the same stuff that I was seeing, which is this new thing happening, as you said, with Testament and, you know, and with bands like Anvil, with many different bands, you know. So yeah, it's just, listen, as Slash says, life sometimes deals you a tough deck.
Right. And
Yeah.
working with Lips and Rob throughout this whole documentary, are there any segments or moments you're like, this is getting too personal, maybe I should stop? Or did you just kind of all power through it while you were?
Well, not really. I mean, I gave them the option. I just
Right.
felt the more personal, the more powerful it'll be. I think I wanted to do behind the music. You know,
Right.
the behind the music story we've seen millions of times before. It's so boring. This was like peeling away the layers and showing people in a, you know, in a much more real, perhaps less rock starry light. And I thought that was a positive thing to do. I thought that was also an original thing to do because no one had really done it, certainly about metal bands who have this kind of very hard, kind of intense facade. And, you know, I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage to be that vulnerable and that honest. And they were up for it. And so I think, to their credit, this is what's happening.
And you know what I respect most about Anvil throughout this documentary? It's shown that they don't have a huge production quality set design on stage with them. You know, there's no gimmicks behind them on stage or whatever. It's just them performing. So
Yeah.
how was that like watching them perform all of their stops on the tour that you got to witness as well?
I mean, you know, it's the hard truth of being a not big band on the road and having to haul your own equipment and not getting paid, and people trying to pay you in goulash and the usual
Right.
stuff that goes on, you know. So I think it's the truth for 99% of bands, you know, the 1% of bands, you know, Duran Duran, Rolling Stones, you know, whatever, Justin Bieber, you know, it's a
Right.
very small proportion of bands that really make it huge, you know. So, but if you have a dream and you want to play music, this is what I think it's like for most people. And I think that hadn't really been shown in quite the same way. And so that's what I wanted to do something different.
Right, like most documentaries, like music stuff is mainly fluff pieces, and
Sure.
Anvil is kind of, you know, the opposite of that, which
Yeah.
I appreciate as well because it's not so cookie cutter. It's really
Uh,
just gets to the core when you watch it. So was that kind of a different aspect you wanted to take with this documentary as well?
yeah. Exactly. It was, I wanted to do something that people weren't expecting, and still 13 years later, people aren't expecting it, which is great. And we're being discovered by a whole new generation because, you know, the great thing about Utopia, who released the movie, is they're like, look, these young fans who are going to find this movie, they've never heard of the band, they've never heard of the movie. So let's just treat it like it's a new movie. So they're releasing it as if, you know, because the audience who they want, who they're getting now, has never heard of this movie before.
Right.
Well, that's great. So it has a sort of fresh energy to it, and people are responding. The other night we had a standing ovation, you know, just like in the old days, but it's also not the old days, it's now. So the composition of that, when I asked how many people had never seen the movie before, 2/3 of those 1,200 people raised their hands in the room the other night. We're like, it's a new movie to them, and they're all young. So you have to just, you know, be grateful when a sort of miracle like that happens, because honestly, you're lucky it happens once in a lifetime, you know.
Right. And I was just reading this article from about a year ago, I guess. Anvil announced maybe in March of last year that they were recording a new album.
Yeah.
Does that have any correlation to do with the re-release of Anvil, the Story of Anvil as well?
They were just carrying on doing what they do, which is record tour, release new records. So that was really nothing to do with it. And then you know, it just came up because my godson wanted to show his high school buddies the movie last summer, and he did, and they went nuts. And then that led to us getting offers from distributors to re-release the film. So it was quite organic. You know, Anvil has its own life, you know, so you just kind of along for the ride, and hope that new people discover it and find out about it and are curious and go and watch the trailer. And exactly. When is your thing going out, by the way, AJ?
What, this interview? Probably as soon as it can.
Tomorrow or something?
It maybe by the end of this weekend, I'll try to get it
Oh,
up.
I see. Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, because tomorrow night it's across theaters nationwide, but yeah, so it'll be available. You'll be able to find it. Just go to anvilthefilm.com and you can find out where you can see it on the screen or get tickets to see it, because I have a feeling the movie's been running for 13 years. I think it's going to keep running.
Right. And even
It's
with
like
this
heavy metal, like a heavy metal Rocky Horror show.
yeah, it is. And kind of with this re-release, who knows, it could get that midnight cult classic kind of audience that just keeps bringing it out to theaters yearly. Who knows what could happen with
Who
this?
knows? Whatever, it's a great thing to see it have another life.
Well, it's also what's up next for you, Litz and Rob after Horror Night.
I don't know. We're going to stop talking about making a sequel. Who knows whether anyone wants that? But we've shot some stuff. I don't know, man. We're going to hang out and probably play some loud music. And Rob and Lips are going to get very high, and I'm going to eat pizza. That's probably what's next.
That sounds like a good time.
Yeah, it should be fun, man.
All right, well, Sasha, thank you so much for taking the chance and giving me this interview. It's been fun.
No, of course, man. And thank you for your support and putting it out there and putting it in front of people who don't know the film and have never heard of it. And hopefully they're curious and want to check it out and go watch it, because it's a very it's intense, it's funny, but I think there's people seem to be getting something from it. So I think that young people need stories that are represent their truth, which is going through extremely tough times, and yet still the fact is you can't give up and you got to have hope, because there's always tomorrow.
Beautifully said, Sasha.
All right,
Have
man.
a good day, man. Thank you so much.
Take it easy. Have a good one.